name was fondly Tricky Dicky, and he was with Malaysian Airlines. And he knew Bob McLean. And Bob, I'm never sure whether it was Bob or Tricky Dicky who sort of instigated bringing busloads of people from all over Australia to the farm. And that was before it was actually a restaurant. And there were days when there'd be people swimming in the lake, in the dam, with nothing on. But that wasn't Bob. That wasn't Bob. So oh yes, and perhaps they were intoxicated, but I'll leave that for you to decide. But it was really the beginning of the Wednesday table, Matt, you just alluded to. The Wednesday table was the most important thing, I think, in my days of the pheasant farm. And the legend, of course, is Bob McLean. And so, because of Bob, and there was Rod Schubert and Charlie Melton and Rocky O'Callaghan. Not allowed to say Rocky anymore, am I? It was every single steward. The lunches that were there in those times were just so fantastic. I never gave him a menu, and Bob hates parsnips, and I hate potatoes. And I always used to, all through winter, have parsnips on the menu to go with the pheasant. And for Bob, I did potatoes. The only person ever to get potatoes at the pheasant farm. And so every visiting journo, artist, winemaker was brought to that was in the valley, was brought to the Wednesday table. And there's some memories that are particular. Oh, if Colin had been over to Port Parham and caught crabs, he would get back, hand-pick the crabs, and we'd have the crab sandwich. And that was Rod. Rod, do you remember telling me, if you're going to put a crab dish on, don't bugger it up with fancy stuff. Just do a crab sandwich. So I did, but it was, of course, with mustard bread, and the mayonnaise was from the mustard of the crab, and Colin would be there when I went home, and all of you fellows, in fact, often you were the ones that locked up, if we ever locked up in those days. If we ever locked up in those days. I remember Carlo Petrini's first visit to Australia. Carlo Petrini of Slow Food. And Bob, Rod, do you remember that day? He came along, and his guest was a dwarf who didn't speak any English, and he was, truly, no, he was a dwarf. And he was a thespian. He was a thespian, a true thespian. And he jumped on the table. This was after we'd had a few. He jumped up on the table, and he spoke and sang in all these tongues that were as if they were French, Italian, Spanish, all these languages. You knew he was creating a language, but you couldn't remember. And just like every start of every wonderful thing, because of Carlo's first visit and then a later visit to Tia and Rod up on the hill, we were responsible for starting the first slow food movement in Australia, September the 1st, 1996. And so that was the Carlo story. The Christmas parties of the Wednesday table. I have these on the wall, all the signatures of people, some not with us anymore, of everyone that was present, and it is an alumni of the wine industry. So, and Bob, the shared gig we did in Sydney for the Barossa, he taught me to work the room. Bob McLean taught me to work the room. And so, if anyone deserved the Sir Lunch-a-Lot, it was you, Bob. As you know, it goes down, you are a legend, you are part of the history of the pheasant farm, which is so dear to me, and the Barossa, which is dear to us all. So, Bob, come up here. We've got to induct you as the first legend of the legend farm.
I mean, I've always aspired and thoroughly enjoyed being so much alike. When you actually start talking about it, you've been embarrassed. When you sit there and see it, you just die. But thank you, Maggie, for the words. Thank you, Stuart and St Hallett, for remembering us all. It's very important. It's been about 10 years, I suppose, since I've really come back here. And we had a lot of fun when we built St Hallett. And yeah, the building of St Hallett was actually 3 parts of building lunch. Mind you, I did learn it from Len Evans about 20 years before, how to do it and what to do. And which leads me even into today, because I see Robert down there and one of our first ever Legends of the Long Lunch. And I'll just sniff for a second. Hold on. I didn't have a hanky.
They don't make them anymore.
And a proper one.
It's a proper one.
We'll watch that, we'll take it.
No, I don't watch it.
One of the great things about the Legends of the Lunch did start here, and it was literally Legends of a Long Lunch, a literary lunch, which is an alliteration, I hope. And the idea was just to have people talk about their life, predominantly wine people and people who just love wine, and just let it roll. And Phil, I agree, you're very good, by the way. I just hope that we take 3 parts of it, because I'd like to show that to a lot of young winemakers. About how we take the Barossa forward, working together as teams, as young people, new worlds. And I'll get on that in a bit. The lunch was terrific. The first one, I just recollect the first one because it was just an absolute mind blower and a ball of terror. Because we sat here we invited Len Evans to come down, the little Welshman, and he's dead now, which is sad, but we all died. He came down, we invited him to talk about what he liked about Barossa, but then we loaded up a couple other people, including Robert down there being one of them, Peter Lemon being the other, and I said, I want some stories about Len. Well, Hill Smith, who's very articulate and has a lovely wit, and then Peter Lehman, who got his wife to write all the bitchy over the other things. He sat there, and they wrote. And they shafted Len beautifully.
It's the best I've ever
But having said that, the little Welshman, the golfer, the wine man, the arguer, he walked up and he took them both on, both barrels. It was one of the greatest lunches we fell
just spontaneously
over. We couldn't walk. And that is literally what legends are built on. And I suspect the success of today, as long as St Hallett always keep good food, a lovely lunch, sitting at table is a great thing. Sitting at table with good wine is a good thing. Sitting at table with conversation is a good thing. A good speaker, talk about your experiences. I think we're supposed to pass on the experiences. But that's where legends start, and if we keep that, it'll go on for another 20 years. So on that, I think that's terrific. But thank you very much for the recognition.
Thanks to Bob and Maggie. We'll have another little break now, and in just a few moments we'll have Phil up to do a bit of a Q&A. We'll have a couple of roving mics working in the room, but if you